you for joining Leadership Rediscovered, a podcast devoted to all things leadership. I'm Laura Siebold, president and founder of Shine Consulting, and each episode I interview different leaders from different walks of life and different industries to talk about their unique definition of leadership. And today I am talking to the leader, Jon Dower, who is the executive director for WBSL Solutions. Jon, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Excited to talk to you. Now, I just gave the brief intro of your title and all that, but you have like a lot of other titles and a lot of certifications.
Yeah, so
you have a lot of acronyms and things by your name, which is very impressive.
I am the quintessential did everything backwards person. I'm born and raised in Morgantown.
Nice.
Youngest of five.
We'll have to talk about being the baby. All right, keep
being
going.
Being the baby is important.
It is the best. Let's just get that out of the way. Keep going.
So kind of my whole life has been about service in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Around the age of 13, my brother graduated from Le Cordon Bleu Culinary School and took me into a kitchen, and I started washing dishes, and very, very soon thereafter, I found myself in a leadership role in a kitchen.
Wow.
And the next 20 plus years of my life were devoted to leadership and or maybe managerial work inside of a kitchen.
Oh my gosh, which seems very stressful.
Yeah, it's definitely a work hard, play hard sort of area.
Yeah.
Which comes with its own level of debauchery is
Yes.
probably the right word.
Yeah.
And life afforded me an opportunity to kind of hit restart. And when I hit restart, I found a different passion, a different vocation, but a lot of transferable skills that came from different employment to a completely different field.
Wow. Very cool. All right, let's dive in on all of these. So
Absolutely.
talk about a little bit, if you would, gosh, where to start? Because now I kind of want to go back to the kitchen.
Yeah, I get it.
It's so interesting to me because I feel like that had, up until the past few years, I think that's been a world that's been very hidden to most people unless you are in that type of work. Because, of course, if you're in a restaurant, as an example, you don't usually see what goes on in the kitchen, right?
Absolutely.
And then you've got all of these TV shows in many cases that have come out, or stories that you start hearing, and you get that window into that world, which I think is a very interesting world. But to me, it seems like it's a very high pressure, high stress kind of world. Things are moving very fast. It also seems generally hot. Is it hot in there? It looks hot.
Extremely hot.
Okay. Which probably just makes people angry, I feel like.
you brought up how media has tried to capture it.
Yeah.
And that show, The Bear, the first season of it on FX, is a pretty good representation of what kitchen life is like.
Yeah.
High stress, yes, but only during rush. So you have a dinner rush. So it is kind of the quintessential prepare for chaos, and then chaos happens, and then you're trying to recover from and then you start all over
rebuild
again.
And start again.
Yeah.
So interesting. I didn't think about it that way. So that's like the prepping activities are all just trying to get you to move through the chaos as efficiently as possible.
Yeah.
Is that a way to say it?
In actual kitchen life, there's a French term called mise en place, which means in its place.
Oh, yes.
So you're doing all the things and putting them in place so that when the chaos happens, you're able to then be able to ride the wave, so to speak.
Yeah.
And not end up, as they would call it in the kitchen, in the food service industry, in the weeds. So deep into it, you can't see the forest through the trees.
That would be my kitchen experience at my house.
You'd be surprised how fast you can.
Laura, why didn't you read through the recipe all the way? Why didn't you get your ingredients out all the way before you started on this?
That's the way it works.
Yeah. But, I heard that term for the first time recently, and the context they were using it in was for personal productivity. And it was actually applied to business owners, and they were trying to teach people how to set themselves up for success. Sure. And I thought that was a really interesting analogy that they were using. So when you talk about transferable skills, that's one in particular that probably you've carried forward with you.
Certainly in navigating complex personalities.
Yeah.
There's nothing more complex of personalities than food service industry.
Yeah.
You have very different personality types that
Yeah.
will work in food service. You tend to have a lot of your extroverts in the front of the house because they're interacting with the
Hmm.
public, and a lot of the introverts are behind the scenes working in the kitchen,
But
which
usually creative people too, I would
very,
imagine.
and it's weirdly the only creative bone I have in my body is with food.
Oh, very cool.
But all in all, I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah. Okay, so that's cool, and we'll come back to that part of the story. But fast forward to tell us a little bit more about what you do right now, especially in the context of the leadership role that you have.
Ooh, so they're like where to start.
I know.
So I do a couple things. So my mainstay is being an executive director of a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So I started with one of my mentors, Doug Leach, back in
Yeah.
2013, when he brought the first sort of recovery home to North Central West Virginia. And we were novel and no one exactly knew what we were.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of pushback. So not only were you fighting to provide this necessary service for a population that's obviously or oftentimes stigmatized and
Sure.
marginalized, but at the same time, you were trying to build a ship while you're sailing it. And that's
Ooh.
never an easy thing to do.
No.
When Doug initially hired me, he said, I can give you like 3 or 4 hours a week. And
Mhm.
because food service wasn't going to be adaptive for my future, I took a leap.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, I was working 40, 50, 60 hours. And
Which probably does feel more like food service.
it does.
Yeah.
In essence, I don't have a clock in, clock out sort of perspective
Yeah.
because I also do a lot of other things. So
Yes.
for a different company of Doug's called Ascension, I do
Hmm.
a lot of the services that are more concierge style.
Okay.
So you may have seen the show Intervention on A&E.
Oh, yeah.
I do that. We just don't play music in the background, and it's not nearly that dramatic. But
Oh, I'm so intrigued to hear more about that.
that is definitely it brings some variety to your life.
Yeah.
Work a lot with families that are dealing with everything from mental health disorders to substance use, and that has been a pretty core thing, and that's
Hmm.
kind of what got me started in this field.
Okay.
But as I said, I did things backwards. I went
Yeah.
back in my 30s and got a master's degree in clinical rehabilitation and mental health counseling. And then as soon as I graduated, they started asking me to be a professor at WVU. So I
Wow.
teach undergraduate and graduate school related to either addiction or counseling perspectives. In fact,
Oh,
the last 4 days from about 7 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, I spent every day working with graduate students.
wow.
And now my relief is coming and talking on a podcast.
What a life you have, Jon.
Uh, and to throw this the sidebar in, I also own a catering company, so
Well, yeah, I was going to ask if you still
I d-
stay with.
so I try to limit that because while it is financially beneficial,
Hmm.
it is a lot of work and a lot of
Yes.
energy, and I try to limit myself to something like 2 events a month.
Okay.
Uh, and further from that, I'm not doing a wedding, I want to do it for a philanthropic organization.
Oh, very cool. That's neat. So I should have mentioned earlier that WVSL, that stands for West Virginia Sober Living, correct?
It did initially, and we
Okay.
because we branched out and we have more than just recovery housing. That's kind of why we went
Okay.
to the letters because that's what we're known as statewide.
Gotcha.
But we do everything now from we own a construction company. I know that sounds pretty strange.
Interesting.
To hiring a lot of people with lived experience,
Okay.
meaning they're in recovery from substance use disorder and they're
Yeah.
out in the communities trying to make our communities better places.
Yeah.
And now we have a behavioral health arm of our company that does
Wow.
therapy and group counseling and things along those lines.
Yeah.
So the idea of calling us sober living didn't really fit our
That
company
makes
anymore.
sense. Yeah. It's
But
broader than that.
at the same time, our branding was there, and I didn't want to
Yeah.
kind of recreate branding and have to educate consumers all over again. I
Yeah.
wanted to be able to grow, not dig up the past and start
Yeah.
all over again.
Yeah. So interesting. So, what I'm so fascinated because you have so much variety, which I really appreciate because I like variety. But you have so much variety in the roles that you play. What is I'm sure there's no typical day, but maybe even just what is the typical day in the life of an executive director? If nobody's done that type of work before, what does that look like?
A firefighter.
I'd imagine.
It really is. I joke, I say it in jest a lot, but it's true. So a
Yeah.
lot of what being an executive director is being concerned of kind of a global plan for your
Hmm.
company while keeping considerations of who's helping you get there.
Gotcha.
And if you're just too concerned by the end goal or the outcome, you're going to miss the human feel. And
Hmm.
if you spend too much attention paying attention to the humans, you don't go in the direction you need to go.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just navigating the fires that inevitably happen inside of an agency,
Yeah.
and making sure that everyone feels heard and respected. I like to
Mm.
say that we're I would frame us as a I'm trying to use appropriate language. We're a cast of characters that are a dysfunctional family, but when you put us together, we can do amazing things.
Yeah, you can come together as a team and really change the world,
Absolutely.
which is really cool. I was curious about, because you are involved in so many things and you have so much going on. It sounds like it could be overwhelming at times, and I'm just curious what drives you, what keeps you motivated to do all these things.
Um, I I would say legacy, but I don't know that that's always true.
Mm.
Uh, my own personal story of misusing substances and having a disease process. I did a lot of harm in my community. Maybe not, burn down houses or
Right.
committed huge crimes, but I know the negative ripple effects I had
Yeah.
in my community. And I was afforded an opportunity to do the opposite.
Mm.
And working for a nonprofit doesn't give you the best standard of living,
Right.
but it certainly affords me the opportunity to give back to what was freely given to me.
Mm.
And that's much of the way that teaching at the university is about. And let me reframe that, or say it a different way. So I can go out as an individual and maybe help 8 people today.
Yeah.
Best case scenario, it takes an hour. But if I go
Yeah.
teach inside of a university of a classroom of 30 people and then they go out and
Mhm.
spend 8 hours, instead
Mhm.
of my 8 hours, I'm now doing 240 hours of good in
Yeah.
my community. So I feel like I have a fiduciary duty of, because I had a second chance, to find
Yeah.
ways to give back to what was a community in which loved me before I could love myself.
Oh, that's so good. I love that. It's amazing because that's kind of how I think about leadership. When you talk about teaching and the ripple effect that comes from that, a lot of people will say, "Why, Laura, why do you care so much about leadership? And why do you focus so much on leaders? Why don't you, there's a lot of other people in an organization. Why not focus on them?" And I do care about them, but I feel like a lot of times if you can get to the leaders and impact someone's leadership style and improve maybe someone's leadership style, there's such an impact to that because of all the other people that they are interacting with. They will all get that benefit too if you're able to kind of single out who that leader is and have a positive influence on them.
I fundamentally agree with that. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that a leader is a verb, it's not a noun. And I think a
Mm.
lot of people believe you're given this moniker of leadership. Eh,
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the funny part is, this whole week I taught group therapy, so there's obviously a leader in group
Yeah.
therapy, and kind of one of the core tenets is people don't mind being led if they're led well.
Ooh.
And if they're not led well, it doesn't go
Then they have
so
a lot
well.
of opinions
Yeah, they
about
have a
it,
lot of
don't they?
opinions, and they're disorganized, and they're not plugged in, and they're
Yeah.
not engaged. And I see that a lot in vocation.
Mm-hmm.
That there's not the consideration of, who am I leading and in what direction am I going? Am I taking in input from the people that I have, which are our most valuable resource, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're still concerned about ego.
Oh, yes.
It's so concerned about ego and concerned
Mm-hmm.
about, am I going to conquer the world? I'm more concerned about, how are we getting there, and what
Yeah.
am I doing for the people that are making us get there? It's much more to me about service than it
Mm-hmm.
is about satisfaction of leadership.
So, oh, I'm excited. So, what is I feel like you've kind of defined already for us, but I'll ask a more pointed question of what is your definition of leadership? Because I
I,
love
th-
where you're going
I
with
think it's
this.
a characteristic of action in which you are pursuing the big picture,
Mm-hmm.
or the goal, and while considering the people that are going to get you there. Because no leader got them to their goal.
Exactly.
It's impossible. And what I see, not to jump forward in questions, but what I see that differentiates a good leader from maybe not such a good
Yeah.
leader is the ones that are inclusive versus the
Mm-hmm.
ones that are exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was lucky enough throughout my career to have a bunch of different people that I was able to take a like trinket of knowledge.
Yeah.
And one leader from a very prestigious organization that I can't really say more about because of my job
Mm-hmm.
once told me the leader is the guy that's not the smartest person in the room. He's, in fact,
Mm.
the guy that strategically places smarter people in the room to just make the decision while leaning on the smarter people. And I took that to heart, and I aim to not necessarily be the most uneducated person in the room,
Right.
but to
We're
put,
definitely not.
yeah, to put a skill set around me that complements my weaknesses
Mm-hmm.
without being insecure about my weaknesses.
Yeah. Well, it's like how you use the term dysfunctional
Yeah,
earlier,
yeah.
a dysfunctional family or a dysfunctional team or whatever. But if you think about maybe as individuals, or as an individual, I may say I'm dysfunctional. But if I am paired with other people who bring out the best in me, who are complementary to me in terms of there's things that you do really well that maybe I don't do so well, and vice versa. And so now instead of me just trying to do everything by myself and knowing that I'm likely going to fail at that, having that partnership of one other person or multiple people to say, okay, how can we best figure this out together and achieve this goal together? It becomes very functional from that perspective if it's done
Certainly.
right.
If it's done right, and
Yeah.
if you divorce yourself from control.
Yeah. Oh, can we talk about
Yeah,
control?
absolutely, we can talk about control.
I had a moment the other day. So I have been for years talking about there's an author named Dan Pink, and he wrote a book a long time ago called Drive. And he was talking about motivation. And he mentioned that the kind of the key things, everyone always talks about money, which obviously, yes, we all have bills to pay and all that good stuff. But I mean, you just gave an example of how that's not the sole motivator for someone in a role. But he said, once you take that off the table, the things that really motivate people are autonomy, mastery, and a sense of purpose. And so I have taught this for years and years and years. And recently I made the connection because the way I normally would describe autonomy is just we want to be able to choose our own destiny. We want to have that ability to make decisions, the agency to make decisions about what I do, when I do it, how I do it. But then I had a moment recently where I thought it's control. I've never thought about autonomy in that sense, but a lot of times I see a lot of challenges when either I feel someone is trying to control me. So when you hear about micromanagement as an example, my
Hmm.
gosh, if I had $1 for every time someone complains about their micromanaging boss, I could
Yeah,
do a
you
lot
wouldn't
of
be here,
great,
right?
yeah, philanthropic things, let's say, with all that money. But it's fascinating to me how many people say, I can't stand to be micromanaged, yet how many micromanagers there are. So if everybody's saying, I don't like to be micromanaged, but then we have all of these micromanagers that exist, it causes me to think, where's the disconnect there
Well, the disconnect is they don't want to see themselves.
as a
They're
micromanager,
not
right?
seeing self-awareness. So the
Yeah.
things that we oftentimes as human beings most are repulsed to are the things we see in ourselves that we don't like about us. I mean,
That's
it's the truth.
true. It's so true, and that's so hard to hear.
It is, and it's hard to digest and to have the level of self-awareness to say, am I behaving with that person in a way that would be against my core values? And you talked a little about autonomy. I define autonomy as self-empowerment. So
Mm.
if I'm removing someone's autonomy, I'm removing their ability to self-empower. And
Uh-huh.
if you make somebody feel less than, you're going to do the opposite of empower them. You're going to
Yeah.
make them feel tied down, restricted,
Yeah.
probably lower their self-esteem, believe that their purpose isn't valid in life. And, if we can look at the core values of an agency, I think you can say a lot about what the leadership is by the values they represent
Yeah.
rather than the work that they do.
Yeah, and do they practice what they preach? But I just when you said control, it sparked that in me because I do feel like there, and a lot of times in the workplace in particular, we're just in this power struggle all the time where it's like, I want control. No, I want control. Yet we're all trying to also work together.
But
So,
but control is ego, right? So if I have a semblance of belief that I'm garnering control, then it's my outcome. And if
mm,
I don't get the outcome that I want, I can't have the self-awareness to say maybe I'm to blame. I have to have control that somebody below me didn't do the appropriate thing to get me to my outcome.
yeah, why do we like to have control so much?
We don't ever actually have control. We have perceived control,
Yes, you say that
and
too.
that's the actuality of it.
Yeah.
But everyone likes the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, there's this saying in the food service industry: you may love the sausage, but nobody wants you to see how it's made.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. They oftentimes we don't want to. We want the outcome, but we don't want to see the hard work it actually
Mhm.
takes to get there.
That is so true. Wow. Thank you for diving into that. I know
Yeah.
that wasn't a previously discussed topic of conversation, but I just think it's so interesting because I see this popping up over and over again and people really struggling. And I think the perceived control thing is huge because, especially if you think about how many people are being laid off right now and how that rocks their world or what COVID did for people. It was like that was so out of control, right? We didn't know what was going on, what was going to happen next. And it's like we never really knew that anyway, but we thought we did until something like that happens and it throws people a little bit for a loop. And then it's like, how do I get that control back, right?
Sure, and I think that often happens for anyone that has to push a restart in your life.
Mm-hmm.
When you ask somebody who they are, they rarely just say, "I'm John."
Yeah.
They define themselves by something,
Yes.
right? Like, I run a podcast, or
Yeah.
I'm a business owner.
Yeah.
What COVID did was strip back what that capacity was and remove our connection.
Mm.
And whether we like it or not, we're a herd animal. We need to be around other people. And if we're not
Yes.
around other people, we tend to not bode so well from a mental health perspective, from a physical health perspective, etc.
Yes.
And most of the time, vocation equals purpose in someone's life.
Mhm.
So when you take away their employment, you take away their purpose. And if you take
Mhm.
away the purpose, you take away the capacity for them to have self-esteem, self-worth,
Yeah.
belief that they're here for a reason and what that reason is. So
Yeah.
I think you've seen a lot of existential self-awareness.
Yes.
We've seen employment want much more freedom. They're wanting to
Mhm.
work remotely versus in a brick and mortar location
Mhm.
because they want autonomy and because they see
Yes.
their purpose as more than vocation.
Yeah. But can I just get your honest thoughts on the good and the bad of that? Because you were just talking about, we're herd animals. We are meant to be in relation with each other. And so sometimes I worry about I totally get the benefits of working from home and I myself like to work from home. However, I also see that there can be some negative impacts of that as well because it is a more isolating approach to work and you're not, even if you're on video call, it's not the same as sitting in a room together.
It,
I don't
it, it
know.
isn't, and there is a fine balance between effectiveness and efficiency.
Mm.
And when you're looking
Write
at
that down.
remote work, you
Mm-hmm.
may be much more efficient, but you may not be as effective because you're not likely collaborating in the same way.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not like the crystal guy or have some eccentric belief systems,
Yeah.
but I do feel energy in rooms,
Yes.
and I believe that energy is certainly contagious. And if
Yeah.
I have a high energy,
Yeah.
someone is going to oftentimes reciprocate that high energy. And if I have
Absolutely.
a low energy, likewise. Well, if I'm the low energy and I'm not around somebody that's a high energy, I'm going to stay as a low energy. And I think that's one of
Mm,
the downsides of remote work.
yeah.
But on the flip side of that, I think what you're also seeing in our society as a whole is the look of what do I actually value. And I
Yes.
think that's one of those fundamentally misunderstood things by a lot of employers and a lot of leaders.
Yeah.
It's, hey, do I value the paycheck or do I value a little less money, but a lot more time with something that
Mm-hmm.
that leans into the purpose or how I define myself or
Mm-hmm.
what I really want the autonomy to decide for me.
Yeah.
And spending time with family or spending time outdoors or
Mm-hmm.
being able to pursue an interest,
Yeah.
um, being afforded that autonomy to make that choice, that can't happen in the brick and mortar uh, employment that we knew
Yes.
prior to 2020.
Yeah. So yeah, it's tough because therein lies the problem
Yeah,
of trying to solve what do we do, what's best, and you can see where there's benefits to both, and which is why I think a lot of people just go to the mix of okay, sometime in the office, sometime at home, because you're trying to compromise basically and give people the best of both worlds if you can.
certainly. And, any leader is going to see that there are benefits and drawbacks to both approaches.
Yeah.
And if you tie yourself to one thing,
Mm-hmm.
you're putting up blinders to the shortcomings of that
Yeah.
one approach. And I think affording more empowerment of our employees allows us grace as an employer when we
Mm-hmm.
have to pull them in, when we have to have
Yes.
them in the brick and mortar, when we
Yeah.
ask them something that's this far outside of their job
Yes.
description.
Yes. More understanding of
More
that.
understanding, more compassion,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot that goes on in people's lives that as an employer you probably don't consider, but maybe we should.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. That's the thing that I thought really just kind of blew the doors wide open during COVID was those boundary lines between work and home
Hmm.
just completely went away, and actually you saw the more human side to a lot of people. You're on a video call with someone and their kid walks in the room or their dog comes in, or you just saw people from a different perspective that you wouldn't necessarily have seen them from in a brick and mortar professional environment type
Sure.
context. So I think it did humanize a
Crack the
lot.
facade.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like this is what I really look like when I'm not all
Hmm.
dressed up and all of that. And this is what my real life is like. And I for one enjoyed seeing what people really were like and take the facade
Yeah,
away.
I think genuineness will always beat a facade 100 out of 100 times.
Yeah, I agree with you. So sorry, I'm taking advantage of your mental health background because it is really it's so it's such a prevalent and important topic within leadership and within the workplace right now because there's a lot of people that are really struggling and with purpose and identity and what do I want out of life, who am I, all of that. And so I think it's just helpful to keep that as part of our conversation as well because I see it a lot.
Uh, So one, I probably frame things a lot differently than a lot of people when they think of mental health services. I attend mental health services to grow, not because I'm broken, not because I need fixed, because I want to be a better version of self.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of stigma that if you're going and you're seeing a mental health professional, you're broken and you need fixed, and
Uh-huh. Something wrong with you or
and to
you're
tell you
weak.
this, yeah, and to tell you the
Mm-hmm.
truth, there's no clinician out there that's going to fix me anyway. If I am broken, they don't have the power. They're not strong enough to do that,
Right.
but they can empower me to learn skills to fix me.
Yeah.
And when we consider lost productivity, um, I would say to leaders, is it because you're holding their feet to the fire and not affording them reasonable accommodations? If I had a toothache, no one's going to stop me as a leader from
Yes.
allowing that person to go to the dentist.
Yes.
Yet, if somebody is burnt out and they ask
Mm-hmm.
for a day of PTO, it's like, oh my God,
Yeah. Get tougher.
yeah, get tougher, pull it together, pull yourself up by
Mm-hmm.
your bootstraps. And
Mm-hmm.
then we wonder why we see some of the social issues that we see in our community. It's
Yeah.
because we don't do the self check-ins. You go yearly for an annual physical. When's the last time you've heard of someone say, I went to a counselor for my annual mental health check? We
John, I've never heard someone say that, but you're right.
we don't do that, but
You
yet
get
it's
your oil
such a
changed in your
yeah,
car.
right. And you do that at a regular interval,
Yeah.
right? And when you don't, there is problematic behaviors likely coming for your car.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we don't do that with our mental health, and somehow we allowed insurance companies to say that mental health is different than physical health, and
Yeah.
we have to have different insurance for glasses and for our teeth,
Teeth.
as if those are different parts of our body
Yes.
too.
It's fascinating, isn't
Yeah,
it? Mm-hmm.
it's amazing how much they correlate. If I feel good about myself, I will put better things in my body, which will impact
Yes.
my overall physical health and likely my productivity as an employee too.
Yeah. And it's so huge too. I think about there's a lot of individuals that I do career coaching with, and they are very stuck. They are very unhappy, and they know that there's action that they need to take to put themselves on a better path, but they're so just they're burnt out. They're beat down, they're exhausted, and I think they have a really hard time getting unstuck or getting out of that frozen spot of how do I get the energy to take better care of myself so that I can go look for this different job or do something different. It's just kind of they hit this point where things kind of fall apart for them, and they at least can rationally somewhat see maybe that, ooh, I'm not where I need to be, but also I don't know if I have the energy to get there either, or the momentum to get there. And I think that's a tough place to be in. And I just see that a lot with some of the individuals I'm talking to.
So for me, that comes down to two things: fear and trust.
Mm.
Fear from a perspective of we know the devil that we know, right? So if we're
Yes.
stuck in an employment opportunity that we don't like, we at least know how people are going to behave, what I can get away
That
with.
micromanager is not going to stop
Right.
micromanaging.
But I also know if I show up there, I can have trust in the fact that I'm going to have some semblance of a lifestyle. Taking that jump brings in the fear factor. And the other piece of that trust issue is if life has beaten me up over and over and over and over again,
Mhm.
it's very hard for me to trust that this other person that's telling me to take this leap towards betterment and empowerment and
Mhm.
self-authoring a new future
Yeah.
is going to be right, because all the evidence suggests in my past that if I take that leap, I'm going to get beat up like I've been beat up so many times
Mhm.
before.
And then it becomes like a self-fulfilling
Right.
prophecy.
Self-sabotage is certainly a component to many individuals' life.
How do you take that first step though? How do you work through that?
Um, I think for me, I'm sitting here today not because of me. I'm sitting here today because of thousands of people put me in this chair,
Mhm.
and that's a really easy way to strip yourself of ego. It really is, because
And to stay humble. Yes, yes.
yeah. So there's a fine line between humiliation and being humble.
Yes.
And I was afforded opportunities to not be humiliated,
Mhm.
but to live with humility,
Yeah.
and I think that's important.
Yeah.
So it's giving somebody a chance sometimes when they don't deserve that chance,
Mhm.
or they haven't earned equity for that chance. It's not that they don't
Yeah.
necessarily deserve it, but there's been no tangible evidence that they should be
Yeah.
afforded that opportunity.
Yeah.
That's what happened with me, and a lot of people told. One of my favorite sayings, and I'm sorry, I'm a little ADHD.
No, I am too. This is great.
One of
Hence why I'm not even asking you the questions I said I would.
one of my favorite sayings is "What's on the tip of your nose?" And the answer is you have no idea, but everyone else can see you. So if
I
we
love that
allow
saying.
ourselves the honesty
Mm-hmm.
of hearing from other people our good qualities in ourselves and not just
Mm-hmm.
absorbing what we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
Because lots of people are especially the people we love, our parents, our significant other, our children, will oftentimes tell us negative things.
Especially children. Very
Especially children.
honest.
Very honest, very blunt.
Yes,
Um,
brutally honest.
and it's really easy to then absorb that and
Yeah.
become a moniker or a mantra, so to speak. And
Yes.
we believe that negative aspect. But have somebody tell us we're attractive or we're smart or we're a good listener, all these other characteristics, we shy away from, like, no, that's not really me.
That's not real true.
When we have the ability to take an honest assessment of the people around us and really ask, like, what's, and I mean this metaphorically, what's on the tip of my nose? What makes me me? I can live with that genuineness rather than trying to put on the facade that eventually will break it.